So David Lynch, he passed away in recent months, and he is a film director that I have a great deal of respect for. A lot of people look at their favorite David Lynch films or his most iconic ones and they'll say, oh, that's got to be Eraserhead or the Twin Peaks series. But the one film that always comes back to me and just tells me a lot about who David is The Elephant Man. It's an incredible film that tells a story so profound and so deeply resonant with a depth of human emotion and empathy and understanding given to its subject. And I just always loved that. But it's really David's interpretation of art and what it means to the viewer of media, not the artist themselves, that I always found to be quite interesting of an interpretation and really meant a lot to me. If you know anything about Lynch, he never wanted to discuss his work or describe his feelings of his own work. He wanted instead for every viewer to have a unique experience in which they interpret it for what it is. So I just always really liked that concept, and I recognize that I'm really not the only person out there to be so blessed to have enjoyed David Lynch's material. And you can see that in Remedy Entertainment's newest game, Alan Wake 2, including many pieces of their video games that draw on Lynchian tropes and aesthetics in their works. And it is part of why I recently picked up Alan Wake 2 and was excited to give it a playthrough and see how I felt about the game, coming from the lens of somebody who has seen David Lynch's filmography of work, including the Twin Peaks series. I could just really feel the tone and inspiration in the title when Alan Wake 2 first started getting shown off. And so let's talk a little bit about Alan Wake 2. It is a 2023 survival horror game developed by Remedy Entertainment. And Remedy is well known for the Max Payne series, Control, Quantum Break, which is the only Remedy game I have yet to play, but I do own. It's one that I am excited to actually break into the more I've kind of picked up and played their games in recent years. And Remedy published the game while Epic Games published the game. Remedy developed the game, Epic published the game. And this game has an interesting development history. So Remedy originally made Alan Wake 1 with expansions and story continuity in mind while they were at Microsoft. And Microsoft was the publisher of those games and the IP rights owner. So when learning a little bit throughout the process of making Max Payne, that's when they really began to build up some of these concepts for their titles. And by the time that Alan Wake 1 shipped, the game was already pitching and discussing sequel ideas for their follow-up, the game developers, that is. And Microsoft, unfortunately, wasn't interested. Instead, they asked Remedy to start making a new IP, which went on to be Quantum Break, which it released in 2016. And, you know, Remedy was at a crossroads on time, money, resources. And when Alan Wake 1 wasn't as financially successful as they were hoping it was going to be, according to Sam Lake, they were super busy with Quantum Break. And then they followed that right up with Control. And the IP rights for Alan Wake were owned by Microsoft at the time. So when in 2019 Remedy acquired those rights to the series from Microsoft, they went on to sign a 2-game deal with Epic Games and worked on the Alan Wake remaster and its sequel. And from there, you know, the rest is kind of history. So throughout the development too, I've always, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, loved Remedy's technological ingenuity, I guess is what I'd call it. Alan Wake 2 is a game built in the Northlight engine. It's a unique game engine developed in-house by Remedy for their games. And the engine excels in narrative tools, true next-gen graphics, real-time cutscenes, advanced facial capture tech, and mocap integration. And it's always great to play a game with a different engine. You know, you get a different feel to the style and function of the gameplay. And the game was also designed with all sorts of cool things like mesh shaders in mind, a next-gen type of shader, which is used to reduce certain types of bottlenecking from rendering large polygons, and this was an issue with older kind of vertex and geometry shading techniques, so that was pretty cool too. And a high emphasis on ray tracing in the environments, which works fantastically since there is a lot of darkness and flashlighting used in effect throughout the game. A couple other things to comment on. The team was very inspired by works of David Lynch, which we talked about a little bit in the introduction, especially Twin Peaks, and also introduced some detective themes from movies like Seven, The Silence of the Lambs, True Detective. So kind of thinking about the development history at large, it's really nice that we ever got this sequel to begin with. I mean, can you imagine the hoops that Remedy would have to jump through to leave their publisher of the time, buy the rights to one of their most successful and most mysterious IPs at the time, and then go and sign a deal with a competitive publisher to get the game made. So I respect all of the journey that Remedy has been through, not to comment on their games, and found it very interesting just kind of where they've been taking their games title by title, you know, especially when I recently reviewed Control on the channel. In anticipation, I played that game to play through Alan Wake 2. And so that goes to say, was Alan Wake 2 worth that hype? Did I dive through Remedy's game series just to arrive at this point and feel disappointed or not? I guess we'll figure out. But before we talk too much about my experience playing the game, let's look at the game itself. So I have the Alan Wake 2 Deluxe Edition. I got this on physical, and I was waiting for a physical release. And I just want to comment that when the game first launched, it was digital only. I can respect that, but for me, it meant that, well, I have this crazy catalog of games. I'm just going to take my time and wait it out and see if they do a physical release. And they said they weren't going to, but I'm holding one in my hand. And it's a pretty cool one because it includes Alan Wake Remastered. It also includes all of the DLC for the games. That's the Night Springs, the Lake House, all of the cosmetics, different weapon skins and costumes and things like that. So it really is a deluxe edition of the game for sure. And on the back it says, "Blazes, Trails, and Video Game Storytelling." That's a quote from GameSpot. Saga Anderson, an accomplished FBI agent, arrives to investigate a string of ritualistic murders in a small community town. Alan Wake, a lost writer, pens a dark story to shape the reality around him. These two heroes in two separate realities are somehow connected. Can they break out to be the heroes they need to be? And actually a very plain backing to this. I do like the spine. It's nice and colorful, so to speak. And if we open this up, we're going to see on the inside Alan Wake Deluxe Edition. And again, I always love alternative art on the CDs, so even if it's just a solid color, I'll work with it. And then they also have the leaflet, which has the code for Alan Wake Remastered. I own Alan Wake Remastered on physical, so I haven't redeemed it. So I'm just kind of letting it sit there, and maybe one day I'll do something with that. But for now, today, let's get this on the shelf and talk about the game. So we kind of covered some of the high-level story beats that this game's going to offer by reading through the back. But let's dive a little bit more into the story and my opinion of the story that they're trying to tell here in the game. So Alan Wake is basically two separate narratives. So on one hand, you're playing as FBI agents Saga Anderson and her partner Alex Casey, and they're investigating a series of murders believed to be performed by a cult in the town of Bright Falls. So there seems to be, some kind of connection to the murders and a series of manuscripts that are out there predicting the future events of these murders happening around Bright Falls. And so this becomes, pretty complicated when all of a sudden, on top of that, Alan Wake, he mysteriously washes ashore at Cauldron Lake near Bright Falls, warning of a man named Mr. Scratch. Now the crazy thing about this is Alan has been missing for 13 years. And the other half of this narrative is following Alan Wake. So Alan, he wakes up and he's trapped in an alternate world called the Dark Place. And Alan finds himself trapped within a world he created within his novel Inside the Dark Place, and begins writing a new novel that would lead its characters to rescuing Alan from the Dark Place. And so the story continues here, opening up more rabbit holes and mysteries that will take both characters on a journey to discover their role in the game and just, I guess, what the heck is even going on. The presentation in this game is unmatched. It is, I don't know, self-aware in its existence, presenting narrative concepts, in my opinion, that have never been touched before in a game, which I thought were very cool. And there's honestly a lot of ups and downs as well. You know, there's detective adventures, there's quiet psychological thriller moments, there's even an entire musical dance scene. The story can be approached more or less by whichever direction you prefer first. Between the two, you can go play as Saga and Alan, and there isn't a lot of roadblocks along the way to have you just continuing through their story. But I will say that I did enjoy Alan's adventure just a little bit more than Saga's. You know, Saga being a bit more beat by beat of a structured detective story. Not as interesting and weird as Alan's, where you honestly never knew what was coming when you started the next chapter, and the variance in tone and presentation was just fantastic throughout that journey, and be scary sometimes, silly others, very aware of its presence as a story. And so I just found the presentation and tone to be fantastic. And so, you know, there is also a lot of lore building. So not only just the character is great, the lore is great of this world, and the inner character dialogue throughout the story, I think, taking place within either the character's mind place or writing room, these are very cool. So these rooms, with the press of the big button on the PlayStation controller, your character at any moment can be sent here, and you can review case files or the current story's plot direction. You can do upgrades and collectibles, etc. So it really is just like a hub world that's instantaneously available to the player character at any time. So this, I would say, started as an excellent concept. I found myself kind of slowly forgetting about it throughout the course of the game, and so it would lead to times when I would be kind of in this room, going through case files, upgrading, looking at collectibles, breaking up the return to gameplay quite significantly. And so sometimes another thing that would happen is if I got like manuscripts or pieces of lore and I pressed the big button to go to it, I would not be taken directly to it. You know, I'd have to fumble around trying to find which page it was I got. So yeah, just a couple of little things that happened to me. I did find the mystery going on in the game to be pretty engaging, and the presentation to be top-notch, which I was commenting on a bit earlier. And this goes down to even the fantastical music numbers that close out each chapter, similar to Twin Peaks: The Return. And I just loved the character that they were bringing into the game as a result of doing things like this. So they also incorporate like live action sequences into the game, which I thought was very different and fantastic. And there was kind of a seamlessness as well to the acting of a Hollywood movie you could go and see. And so I was just very impressed that not only did they do these live action things, but they were super quality and good. And so these moments, I would say, just really helped add to the game's unique experience and atmosphere. So if you couple that with the excellent, you know, in-game facial animation and details, I feel like this was definitely a next-gen experience. And the funniest thing about this console generation is next-gen experiences are like everything we've been missing. And so it felt just so refreshing to come into Alan Wake 2 and really from the get-go see it and go, wow, this looks great and it's super impressive, not only in its visual fidelity, but in the concepts it was bringing to its narrative, its story. It really felt like something new to this generation. And so I just found that to be impressive as well. So I just gotta say, overall, I love the story. It was witty, it was engaging, it was mysterious, all the above. It is, it's rare to have such an interesting game come along. And Alan Wake 2, from a narrative sense, really hits all the beats. So not only is the story important, of course, we got to look at the gameplay. And gaming, a big portion of it comes down to the gameplay experience. And so how was the gameplay experience in Alan Wake 2? Was it just as next-gen? Was it just as impressive? Well, let's talk a little bit about it. So the game is an action-adventure game with light survival horror elements. The core loop is exploring the chapter's core environment, which is in part kind of open-ended, open world, so you can explore around for side content and awards, etc. And between the exploration, using pistols, crossbows, shotguns, flare guns, rifles, explosives, and a special flashlight which can be used to focus up and open up enemies to attack. So similar to the first game, enemies have to be exposed to light to be most vulnerable to damage and to keep you from running out through your ammunition quickly because you're having to use so many bullets. So I thought that that was pretty cool. And outside of the gameplay itself, which does in fact speak for itself, I also enjoyed the balance of the action, the horror moments, and the detective work through the hub world that we were describing earlier that you have to go through. So pretty solid balance, and as a result it gave the game a pretty good pace as well. One of the things that I really loved about just the experience, especially with just the horror aspects of this game, there's a very interesting enemy in this game which are shadows, and these kind of encounter and will follow along with and be in many of the areas in Alan's part of the journey. And they're so erratic. They seem to, on their own, kind of decide if they're just going to go on ignoring Alan, whispering menacingly, or if they're actually going to jump out and attack. And so I think this is an example of just how fun and different this game can be from a horror lens, because I had never really seen a character's AI act in such a way in such a game. So I was very impressed by that. I would say I had few qualms when enjoying the gameplay aspects of the game. I did run into some funny animations at times, especially when opening doors, like characters' hands would stretch and bend in weird ways. But they very quickly found their way back to where they're supposed to be. And another thing that I was thinking of was the inventory management system. It's pretty encumbering and slow, and it's lacking sorting options or quick solutions for cleaning up the space you have, like an auto sort. Maybe it has these things and I just totally missed it, but by the late game I was very stuffed trying to figure out what to keep and what to get rid of in my inventory space. I guess this can speak to the fact that even on a standard difficulty, it seems like the game is just too easy. And it's kind of lacking in areas where I felt like I was going to be stretched for resources and really needed to think strategically about how to apply them in a certain situation. A great example would be a little more of like Resident Evil 1 or like Remake 2. That kind of vibe to the survival horror resource management would have been great, because that would just heighten an already excellent gaming experience. So largely, not much to say. I think the gameplay herein will really speak for itself. The game's fun, it's fast-paced, the action's exciting, the slower times when you're more experiencing the horror moments in this game I thought were super cool, and it's nicely balanced with a lot of this more detective work where you're very much taking your time and figuring out what the heck is going on. So I did love the gameplay experience. It was very nicely integrated with the story they were telling. And so along with that, there's some addendums always to not only the gameplay, but the game itself, to bring that story in and really build the atmosphere. And big parts of that are the music and the presentation and look of the game. And so let's talk a little bit about the soundtrack and licensed music in Alan Wake 2. I think overall we can start with the original score, and that was done by Petri Alanko, I think is how you'd say his name, and he did the soundtrack for Control. He did that for Alan Wake 1, Quantum Break, so he's been working on Remedy games for a while. And then also had a funny game in his little collection of works, Trials Fusion, which I've played Trials Fusion. I don't really remember the sound too much, but I just find it funny that this guy goes from working on Trials Fusion to then making all of this original soundtrack, very experimental and interesting ambient work for Remedy. So I would say overall I've enjoyed his past works in those games. And sound is an important aspect to video game presentation, especially in a survival horror experience. And I gotta say that Petri's work really captures the essence of this. So a great example is the save music, for instance, in Resident Evil games. Again, I'm gonna think about that. It's super iconic. And we get a equally soothing tune coupled with, dark and mysterious ambient music along the way, as I was describing on our journey. And so, yeah, I would say overall, musically, this game really achieves through its original soundtrack. And the game really engages your ears, and sound was used more than once to really change the dynamics of my situation to the world's dangers. So especially like the shadows that I was describing earlier, they're a really great instance of this, because the shadows, as I was saying, they'll whisper menacingly, and sometimes they'll feel far away. Other times they'll feel like they're right up in Alan's ear, which is the player's ear ultimately, and I really loved the dynamics and how they would shift the danger that you were feeling via the sound design that they were using. So I thought that was pretty cool. I also really enjoyed the voice acting performances. There were a couple that are stronger or weaker. I think one of those that was weaker for me was Saga Anderson, who I felt at times was kind of phoning in the script, and her performance, I guess. You know, it could be overlooked for enjoyment of the story, but I don't think Saga was really given too many moments to shine, quite like Alan. And so it could be a quality thing just from the delivery of the performer. It could also be that Saga is really written to be a more cool-headed, temperamental character who just doesn't have all the crazy moments Alan does to kind of react with a high amount of dynamic to their style of the performance. So I would be curious to learn more about that. If you know, would love to know. And you know, Saga is written more like a character in a novel, and so as opposed to a living person interacting in their world, in my opinion, maybe this was done for certain reasons, but it kind of weakens the performance in my eyes. So yeah, I mean, nothing against Saga. That was just how I felt about the voice acting there. So one of the other things that I didn't really comment on that I wanted to is we talked a lot about the original score there, but also there's a lot of great licensed music from bands in the game that I think are real bands. I didn't go and look them up necessarily, but again, they have a unique song that pretty much closes out every chapter and kind of plays like a TV show almost, and just creates this very nice presentation that maybe you are kind of on this episodic journey. And I just really appreciated that. So from a musical lens, I thought the original score and the licensed music was fantastic. The environmental sounds, the sound effects, I think they just add to the gameplay experience and the journey that you're on. They don't really subtract from it in any way, that's for sure. And I did like the voice acting overall, with a couple performers that stood out to me as having some areas for opportunity. So overall, a great musical experience. So then finally, just wanted to talk a bit about kind of the visual design of this game and the graphics and the technology. So we touched a little bit on those aspects earlier, especially the technical side, but when just discussing the presentation of the game itself, I have to say that I love the presentation. And setting aside that the game still has yet to kind of transcend that blurry mirror issue on consoles, you know, which is very challenging and resource demanding to render. I am fine with that, and I can look past it. And this was the first game during the generation where I was just thinking to myself, wow, this is seriously next gen. So I was really impressed by the look and feel of the game through and through. So from an art direction lens, I thought there was a lot of cool things going on here in Alan Wake 2. Technically, it was a marvelous game to look at. It really felt next gen. What more can I say, folks? Good technology, good looks. It's a great looking game. So, to wrap it up and to share my experience, I really have to say that Alan Wake 2 was here at the right time. I had, you know, recently been watching through David Lynch's works, and saw that he had recently passed these last few months, so when I picked this game up, there was a lot of hope for me in enjoying its artistic vision and its weird narrative and the journey it was sending us on. Because in many ways, I felt that there was an influence here, and as described by Remedy and the developers, there was an influence here through his work, and it did make me feel so good about somebody having the opportunity to do such a thing in their life, to share their creative vision, their passions, and to know that other people out there loved it, not only just as much as I, but via some of the developers that are out there creating very cool games for us to enjoy as well. So I loved Alan Wake 2. It was a fantastic game. I didn't know what to expect, having only played through the first one, of course, when I picked it up. But it exceeded all its expectations. It was a phenomenal game. A+, truly from Remedy, and I'm more excited than ever to play whatever next title they have on the horizon. So if you haven't played Alan Wake 2, I highly recommend it. If you have played Alan Wake 2, we'd love to know if you share my enjoyment of the game. I've heard mixed things and varying perspectives on this title, so I'd be curious to know what you think as well. So thank you for hearing my thoughts. If you like the video, please like the video and subscribe. We'd love to have you join this community and connect with me as we just chat about the kinds of games that we're playing each weekend. So until next time, guys, thank you for watching again. Stay well, stay healthy, and I'll see you in the future. All right, bye.